Hello and welcome to the Strong Bones Coach podcast. I'm Carly, your host, and I'm so glad you're here today. Now, if you've ever felt like life is becoming more chaotic as you enter menopause, you are not alone. If you feel like you're juggling all the changes and you can't seem to find your balance, this episode is absolutely for you. Today, I'm joined by Sharyn-with-a-Why, a natural astrologer, cosmic coach, and breathwork teacher. My breathwork teacher, by the way. Today, we are diving into the fascinating world of astrology, the cycles of nature, and how you can use them to guide yourself through what can feel like the messy middle of menopause. We got talking about how the rhythms of nature and the planets can offer us valuable insights into our bodies and our lives, helping us to make sense of the shifts we experience during this time. Sharyn and I will explore how astrology isn't just about predicting the future, it's all about using it as a tool to better understand where we are in the present moment and how we can embrace the natural changes that menopause brings. If you're looking for a fresh perspective on how to align with nature's rhythms rather than fighting against them, then stick around. This conversation is full of wisdom, practical insights, and a whole new way to look at your menopause journey. So grab a comfy seat, a warm drink, and join us as we explore how astrology and the natural cycles can help guide you through this highly transformative time. Let's get started. So, hi, Sharyn. Welcome to the Strong Bones Coach podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, Carly. Yeah, I'm good, thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited. I've had a great time preparing for today's session.
Amazing. I can't wait to hear what you've got to say. So how about we start with introducing yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and what lights you up.
What a beautiful question. Yeah, so my name is Sharyn with a Y, um, and I am an astrologer, breathwork teacher, cosmic business coach, and various other little things that I tag in on the side of that. Um, I like to say that when I grow up, I'd like to be a life alchemist, and that's really what I do. I support people to remember their true nature so that they can live in hopefully stress-free alignment.
Mm. I love that. And I love how you managed to incorporate so many different aspects of yourself. I feel that as business owners, maybe as women, that we're often encouraged to niche down, to narrow ourselves. Do you find that yourself as well? You've been in business a lot longer than I have.
Yeah, I struggled with that for a long time, because yes, the kind of traditional small business coaching way of doing things, right, is to niche your target market, to niche what you offer. And I, it is easier. I can't deny that it is easier. Except if it doesn't fit, and it just never fit for me, because and I've always been a little like this. I've always had the more structured finance. And my background is in finance, so I've always been more structured, business-like, practical on one hand, and then on the other hand, kind of a little bit woo-woo, you might say, a little bit alternative, kind of interested in I guess expanding consciousness, expanding awareness, if you want it to be less, less woo-woo. Just remembering my true nature, basically, and to try and I'm not single faceted. I don't have one passion, and my astrological chart actually supports that. So my astrological chart is what is called a splash, which means there are planets and angles all around my chart. And you compare that to somebody who maybe has a bunch of planets in the same place, and they will be far more focused and far more single-minded than me, that has them kind of all around the circle.
I love that. And again, just learning to embrace every part of yourself from the inside out. I know the Strong Bones Coach podcast is a lot about working from the inside out, whatever that happens to look like. So what's inspired you? I know you said you're multifaceted, but how did those steps play out or unfold for you? I know you said you started from finance, which is quite, sounds straight and narrow to me. And it's expanded considerably over the years. So yeah, talk me through that a little bit. How's that happened for you?
Hmm. It's actually, I think with most of these things, we tend to follow either what we're interested in or what we think we will benefit from. And that's certainly been the case, for me. So I I was reasonably successful in finance and I enjoy it. I've never really done finance like so I was saying that I was an alternative accountant or an alternative finance person before that became popular. Now everybody says it, and in truth, they're not. Um, so I've in my finance career, I've always been far more interested in the team building, in getting the in the processes and the procedures and setting things up properly so that the dull stuff just happens and then you can concentrate on the stuff that's a little bit more interesting. And that, that translates to both the people side of things and the technical side of things. And at the same time as doing that, I was following my dreams and my passions. I haven't been for a few years, but I was a Glastonbury Festival goer and, interested in numbers and how they play out and patterns and sacred geometry, the shapes that form the very basis of our universe, basically. I've always loved that kind of thing. So that was my gateway in, I guess, to doing alternative things. And in actual fact, um, astrology, breathwork, even coaching to some degree, they all have a scientific base. So they all have a process, they're all structured, they all have symbology and meaning attached to them. So I think it's a science and an art. And that's kind of how I did finance. I did it as a science and an art. So in that regard, I guess there's some continuation.
Yeah, I can really see that. Like I say, you can start with what might seem quite straightforward, but again, when you look into the finer details, the nitty-gritty, there's all sorts of avenues you can go down. I think we're quite similar. Started in dietetics, which can seem very sciencey, but really expanding out and always wanting to know those finer details and yeah,
Yeah.
filling those gaps. That's certainly how it's played out for me, spotting a gap and filling it, and it happens to be something of interest. So. Yeah.
And we follow what we need as well, don't we?
Mm.
Um, and I mean, I want to get into kind of the the nitty-gritty of what we're going to talk about today. But nevertheless, it's kind of worth saying that what our childhoods and our early adulthoods, they shape us in terms of how we interact with the world and how we approach our lives going forward. And it's inevitable that we need to get some understanding, perhaps.
Mm.
We might need to get some resolution to some of the things that have happened to us in life as we begin to grow. And what I realized basically from hitting burnout and having to do something differently, what I realized was that kind of the way I'd been doing life was a little bit too mm, action oriented, kind of momentum focused, and that everywhere in nature, everywhere you look, there's a cycle and a rhythm. And it can be as simple as we have daylight hours and we have nighttime hours, and that repeats, and that is a cycle and a rhythm. And then, of course, because we're interested in the breath, and that's kind of the foundation of a lot of what we do, there's an inhale and an exhale, and it continues, and they're different. They do different things when you are in, different things happen in your body when you're inhaling to when you are exhaling. And they're all really important. You can't live life on a constant inhale, or on a constant exhale. But I did try to live life in like constant daylight mode, if you like, constantly moving forward. So looking at, I would, I was introduced to how astrology particularly is based on these cycles and rhythms, and how following them and being a little bit more present with the cycles and rhythms can give you a clue as to how life might be a little bit easier.
Mm. Absolutely. I think there's so much encouragement these days that to live in that daylight mode, as you said, not to go with those natural cycles and perhaps go against our natural cycles, whether that's women and it's a menstrual cycle or how we're
Yeah.
expected nothing to change as we enter menopause transitions. And it seems to be we're felt to be able to keep it all up and perhaps even solve that lie of we can do it all the time. That's been a bit of a tricky one. So I've definitely fallen foul of that. So I really love that you have that grounding in natural cycles and really going with that, especially when there is so much background to it. So how does that link in with astrology, nature, and what's that going to help us with as we change our life stages?
Yeah, so I think this invitation, which I'm very, very grateful for, to come on here and chat to you, because I've spent the day geeking out basically on what I might talk to you about, which has been amazing. But if I bring it to menopause particularly, um, I I had a very immature approach to menopause. My approach was, nope, not going to happen to me. I'm sailing through it. I'm not going to have any symptoms. I'm just not accepting it. No, I'm not having it. Of course, life didn't quite happen like that. And a lot of things happened to me without me necessarily being aware of them, conscious of them, engaging with them. I certainly didn't take care of myself through the transition and or through the ongoing transition. I've actually had a hysterectomy, so it's which I had when I was very young for reasons various. So I haven't had the normal cycle for a long time. So me knowing where I am in this menopause journey without taking shot, without taking blood tests and things, I'm not entirely sure. Um, but the one thing, as I started to look at astrology and I started to consider these cycles and rhythms, both the shorter ones, so I started with the moon and just noticing that the moon is not full all month round. It gets bigger, like the energy increases, it gets bigger, gets to its biggest, the energy decreases and um it gets smaller. And because I hadn't had a regular cycle um since my mid-30s, then we're almost encouraged as women to get into that cycle, aren't we? Because there are some days when we simply can't perform at full at full throttle, not permanently anyway. We can override it temporarily. So I started to work with the moon, first of all. And in working with the moon, I started to, I mean, I still overrode it, of course. I'm not, I'm nowhere near a saint. But I started to work with the moon, and that just helped me to kind of feel the breath of the planet, feel the ins and the outs. And then as I began speaking to you about like my approach to menopause of, yeah, I'm just not doing it. um, I I realized the more you spoke to me about some of the things that you see and the people that you work with and some of the things you started talking about, it's triggered all these kind of ping, ping, pings going off in the back of my mind. And I thought, oh my goodness, the planets and their movement around the zodiac actually helps us through that menopausal transition. There are indicators of what we might be invited to work through and how the menopause, I guess, might play out for us if only we know our chart a little bit better, which I've simply found fascinating.
Yeah. absolutely. I mean, there's so much in that. I know it's a big question and there's so much more to ask. But yeah, just going back to that sailing through menopause, isn't it? That's that feeling of denial,
Oh,
thinking if we don't look at it, it won't happen, and then wonder why we're struggling. Which I think actually the astrology chats we've had, not that I can keep up with it all. I started with the moon too. But yeah, those chats we've had, it just shows that it might appear things will be one way, and you always have that choice, which I'm sure you'll explain as to how we interact and whether you accept the invitation or not. But at least if we've got that awareness, I think it just takes away that denial, that hoping, closing our eyes and hoping it'll all go away, which we know that approach just doesn't work. Yeah,
yeah.
I've also tried it. Doesn't work, I can confirm.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those don't try this at home people, right?
Yeah,
You share your
exactly.
story and you think, yeah, I don't recommend it. It's what I did, but I don't recommend it.
Yeah, we go through the pain, so hopefully others don't have to learn the
Yeah.
lessons
Yeah,
and pass them
hopefully.
on, hopefully. So yeah, so like I say, you said you started to work with the moon, which actually that's what got me interested in the bits of astrology as a way of actually keeping on top of some of my journaling. I wasn't that great at keeping up with it, but I found that if I just even committed to full moon and new moon, that actually started to help me sync up and understand my own emotional waves a lot more.
Yeah.
And that's then helped me to understand my clients' emotional waves as well. And that was as simple as that. And that's about as far as I got before I met you. But yeah, but talk us through sort of how you can get started or, where would you start to even think about this?
Yeah. So it's actually the breath which we all have, right, is a really good start point. So what I said earlier about, our breath being an active inhale. So, our breath is energized. Our inhale is energized, and then our exhale is kind of gentle and it has less effort in it. And that's the pattern of every single one of the planets. Now, some of them move quicker than others. So the moon moves around, it's actually moving around the Earth, but the moon moving around the Earth does that in 29 and a bit days. And that gives us our most visual because it's the closest to us in order for us to be able to see that. So we can see the moon kind of getting bigger we call it waxing. But that's just a technical term. So it's getting bigger effectively. And then we can see the moon getting smaller when it's been at that nice full moon with full light. And that's the easiest way to get going. The easiest way to get going is to think like and once upon a time, our cycles probably followed the moon. So, without all the interference of society and cultural kind of input, etc., we would probably move more in line with the moon. But either way, there's some parallel. So, at the beginning of our cycle, when we are at our lowest in terms of energy levels, that's akin to the dark of the moon when we can't see the moon, where the moon is new. And the invitation from that is to kind of go within and to rest, review, repair, all of those nice rewords that, just give us some time out. And if we take that time and we have that pause, then as the energy starts to build, because we go from new moon up, up into the building energy, we get some clarity before we start with the more energized stuff. And then, when we hit that big energy, so we've brought all the air into our lungs for want of the same comparison, um, just allowing it then to be and to harvest effectively. So I bring that cyclical movement and I use the seasons as a comparison in all because people can see it. But well, most people who live in the Northern Hemisphere can see it because they go through the seasons. I'm location biased, so sorry anyone who's listening from I don't know, from India or somewhere. I did work in Asia for a while. But yeah, so that seasonal approach to life, I guess, is the easiest way for somebody to get going. Do you have a time of day when you are brighter than other times of day? It's another thing I did when I first started
Mm.
business. Everybody said you have to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning and have finished your day before the rest of the world starts, and then you'll be a successful business owner. I mean, I am a night owl, so that common wisdom that almost killed me because it's like I can't do that time. I don't perform at that time of day. So tune into yourself and see what time of day you um you are most energized. I wake up in winter. So I wake up in that very slowly in that dark, I'm very grumpy in the mornings and I would never book an appointment for 9 a.m. in the morning unless I absolutely had to. Um, but I'd be very happy to book an appointment at 9 o'clock at night because I'm in my autumn at that point. I still have lots of energy at that time of night. Is that helpful?
Yeah, really, really helpful. I think, like I said, we're not encouraged to slow down, are we? And especially taking that pause. And when we do, it's often through illness or
Yeah.
major things that cause you to halt or pause life. So I think if we can encourage ourselves to take those more intentional pauses, those reviews, those reflective times. I mean, it is called menopause as well. I mean, it's in the word. I think
It's
it's
in
an
the title.
invitation.
Do you know, I've
Absolutely.
never thought about that. Thanks for that.
But yeah, so much in that sort of taking that time out. And I think, yeah, having that reminder,
Mm,
even with the moon or, understanding our seasons of life, understanding what works best for us day to day. I know many people don't necessarily always have the ability to do that depending on what they're doing. But it's
mm,
finding those places where you can, isn't it? When to understand that that's okay and it can be part of self-care. So yeah,
yeah.
thank you for that. So how else can our birth charts or the planets be assisting us through this time of life?
Yeah. So
Mhm.
this is where the technical it gets a little bit more technical. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to kind of wave at me if I'm getting too technical and I need to simplify because I
I'll see
do
if I can
geek
keep up.
I do geek out on this stuff, and I I also do try and share everything that I know in one sentence, which it's just not possible, and I appreciate that. I'm trying very hard to drip feed this information in. But I think everybody will have seen the image of the solar system where we have the sun at one side, and then you maybe don't know this, but then there's Mercury, and then there's the Earth, and the moon goes around the Earth, and then there's Venus, then there's Mars, um, then there's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. To think then, and I do this all day. Um, so the reason why it looks as if they're on a line, they're not in a line in actual fact, but the reason why they're often depicted in a line, is because each of those, depending how close they are to the sun, and so all of them radiate around the sun, except the moon, which radiates around us, which radiates around the sun. And they all radiate around the sun to a different timeline. So Mercury goes around the sun 3 times in a year. The Earth goes around the sun once a year. That's why we have a birthday. And then um, Mars takes 2 years to go around the sun. So, a great way of remembering that is that Mars is the planet of action and our will, like the thing that drives us. And what happens at around about 2 in our development? We go through the terrible twos, right? Where we start establishing our no and we start, I will do this or I won't do this. And that happens effectively because Mars has done one rotation around the sun and has come back to where it was when you were born. And each of the planets have different ones of those. And what I realized so I can go through all of them, but frankly, you're not going to be bothered in all of that. Um, what what I realized as I was talking to you, that whenever it was when we were chatting, is that there are the outer planets, the planets at the very edge. So Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, particularly. Um, Pluto takes 248 years to go around the sun. So we are never going to see we're never going to see Pluto back where it was when we were born. But you will all know, you will all remember, and I'm sure you're rolling your eyes, you will all remember having to look at a circle and right angles and like the 180 degrees being a half and right angles being a quarter. Well, we use those in astrology. And so whilst we won't see Pluto go all the way around, we will see Pluto do a quarter at the very least. Um, I think it unlikely we'll get to Pluto doing a half, but we will see Pluto doing a quarter. And so we can look at what's happening in our chart when Pluto gets to his quarter point. And really interestingly, when Pluto gets to the quarter point, it's a different age. The other thing just to say to set the scene is these are not circles, they're ellipses. So again, you will have seen that the planets don't move in an exact circle, they move in an oval. So depending where the planets were when you were born, will depend how fast the planets appear to move, depending whether they are at the edge of the ellipse or in the middle of the ellipse. So the Pluto square happens at approximately late 30s to early to mid 40s. So for quite a lot of us, that's the onset of perimenopause. It's the time when things start to change for us, right? And Pluto is all about transformation. So we are looking at psychological transformation, probably. It can bring kind of emotional transformation and healing. It's often that kind of inner change. Now, this is happening, if you think about 248 divided by 12, this is like generational. It's actually 16 to 20 something or other years that Pluto will be in the same sign. But so there is like a collective thing that's going on. There's like group energy of things that are going on. But there's also, yeah, it just aligns with our perimenopause. So if I give you an example of people who, so I imagine, so for me, I'll use myself. It's easier, isn't it? And I might look at you as well. So
Yeah.
Pluto in Virgo. That's where Pluto was when I was born. It fits the people who were born between 1956 and 1972. So in Virgo, Pluto was there for 16 years. So Pluto in Virgo, the invitation, we spoke about that, right? It's an invitation, not an absolute. So Pluto in Virgo invites a generation focused on healing, wellness, and systematic change. So Virgo is the sign of kind of the small details and the systems and the habits, the things that if we do all the time, we get some benefit from. So the invitation for people who hit their Pluto square, and I wrote that down and I've forgotten where I wrote it now, but I hit mine late 30s, I think, 30. I think I hit mine actually when I had my hysterectomy, 36-ish, which was interesting. But so people in this age group will have a desire for holistic health and body awareness. So certainly, I'm far more body aware, for example, some people in generations beyond mine, where the body, they don't put that same emphasis on their body. So that critical self-evaluation, um, perfectionism, these are all kind of things that are part of the Pluto in Virgo generation. So when Pluto comes to the square and we start with perimenopause, these are the things that are going to come up for us. So we're going to be invited to look at our perfectionism. We're going to be, if we haven't been taking care of ourselves, we're going to be invited to take care of ourselves. If we are in that place of self-judgment, we're going to be invited to kind of step away from that self-judgment, because Pluto is about transformation and Virgo is about all these things that I've just spoken about. So the Pluto square will invite you to transform those things.
Yeah, amazing. And
So,
it's just, yeah, amazing that perimenopause and that fits in with that as well, because yeah, you can feel a lot comes up, and I think you've explained why that might be. So yeah, amazing.
so let me just look at
Yeah,
yours, because I think,
because
I
I'm
mean,
in my Pluto square.
yeah, you're in your Pluto square right now,
Yeah,
aren't
hence our
you?
conversation, just having
I know.
invited you on the podcast as discussions around
I was
I'm
going, oh,
in it
Pluto
and
square.
notice the patterns.
Yeah. So you are in, so was your Pluto in Libra? You can't remember, can you? What year were you born, darling?
84.
84. So you could be in one of, I should have checked you out, shouldn't I? I'm going to assume you were at the end of Pluto in Libra. You may not be, but let's see how this sits with you. So this generation would be focused on relationships
Mhm.
and balance and social justice. So that's that's the theme of Libra. So relationships, balance, social justice, and values, actually. So think then about your perimenopause when this square happens. You're perhaps going to be redefining personal relationships. You're perhaps going to be putting boundaries in place and establishing what works for you and what doesn't in relationships. You're going to be looking for harmony between your emotional needs and your physical needs. Again, because that's a Libra theme. So in this perimenopause stage, you might have a really good look at your relationships and how they're supporting you. Um, and you're looking at pulling back, these are Pluto themes, you're looking at pulling back your personal power and embracing being authentic as opposed to doing what society says, and balancing your needs with what other people expect of you. So it's a completely different energy, isn't it? To the
Yeah.
energy of to the energy of perfection, self-judgment. And I'm not saying you don't have any of those either, but because you have a full chart, I'm just talking about one planet here, and I'm just talking about one transit of one planet. So it's like minute in terms of the big scheme of things. But um, you can see if you look at society and how it's developed over the ages, you can see how the themes of people's interest is different, depending where Pluto was when they were born.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes you can assume that that's more because of the nurture as to what your environment has got going on. And because we do have these clumps of, school of whatever, and we seem to have the same interest, but it makes sense because we're all born at a similar
Yeah.
time. So we'll go through similar things at the same time as well. So yeah, I mean, and if you were to look back on my last sort of 10, 15 episodes of this podcast, you'll be able to see my talk around boundaries, authenticity, values. It's
Oh,
really
really?
funny. And I thought it was just so funny that if you was to look back over the last year of podcasts, even that you would see that they are topics I've been covering, the ones that are a little bit more personal. So yeah, you've called that out perfectly, but it just goes to show
Just goes
that
to
we
show
can
that
use
this
that.
stuff
Yeah.
works, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think this could be a really good thing to look at as well, especially when we hit perimenopause. It can feel like everything's falling apart. It can feel like we don't know where to start. we tend to experience this at a time of life when career might be peaking, but we've also got competing interests of children, parents, just wanting to do more of life. And it can all feel like a lot, and it's so knowing where to
Yeah.
focus and even
Yeah.
maybe some kind of not necessarily, well, I know there's the joke about which planet you're going to blame for this, but maybe making some sense of it all.
Well, that's how I use astrology. I don't use it as a predictive tool, that kind of the bit in the newspaper or magazine that tells you that you're going to have the best month ever every month. I don't do it for prediction. I never have. I do it for self-awareness and self-understanding because if I can understand, if I can understand the energies that I'm operating within, because everything is energy. And if I can understand the energies that I'm operating in, I get a deeper awareness and a deeper understanding of myself. And then I can do one of two things, I guess. I can then I can then explain it to other people, for example. This is what I'm going through at the moment, cut me a break. Or I can use it to be kinder to myself, Um, I have a huge perfectionism tendency. I now know where it comes from. It doesn't change the perfectionism tendency. It just means I can back off a little bit when I'm pointing the finger at myself.
Absolutely. Just more like catching yourself in it. It doesn't always stop you with that self-criticism, but perhaps you call it out and change it before it takes you too far down the rabbit hole, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that, and to kind of keep the there's never any one thing happening at at a time. So if you think about all of these planets, they're all circling all at the same time in their own little on their own little path. So there are many things that are happening at the same time. And around about your early 40s, Neptune also squares.
Mhm.
So it could be a little bit after Pluto, it could be at the same time, it could be a little bit, it could be a little bit later. You have to look at your own chart to know. But Neptune is around, and I loved this one because one of the things I've struggled with in my menopause is sleep management. And I'm sure you will have mentioned this on your podcast. You can't not, I don't think. Um, and we could blame the Neptune square for this because again during this so your Neptune square also happens in this perimenopause period and it the Neptune invitation is to dissolve your old identities. So I remember when I had my hysterectomy, I had a friend, she was far more connected and emotional than I was. I was extremely happy to be having the hysterectomy because of all the troubles I'd had and how painful it had been, basically. So for me, it was absolutely no problem at all. My friend kind of wept and grieved for my loss of femininity,
Mhm.
which I simply didn't feel. But there is that thing within that menopause cycle that actually you're changing. You're not having that same connection to your own feminine cycles. So that kind of dissolving of that old identity of potentially being a mother or being a mother again, depending on what's happened previously. Um, you know, Neptune invites us to dissolve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And loss and grief comes up a lot in menopause. It's one of the real big
Ah,
emotions that I think doesn't get talked about as openly, or it's not always talked about as something that everyone goes through. But yeah, it runs through everybody.
right.
That
Okay.
I speak to, they have that feeling of loss and maybe don't always feel like they understand it until we talk about it a little bit deeper. But yeah, it's a big
Interesting.
part, big thing that comes up. So that gives
Ah,
some real insights there. That's
so there's,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And it also kind of it also Neptune also encourages us to look at the meaning of life.
Mm.
So again, at that kind of age and in perimenopause, you mentioned before, you might be at the height of your career, but you've also got a family to for, or you've also got a desire to take care of yourself more, or another Neptune thing to kind of get that, to spend a little bit more time on your spiritual development. And you've got all these conflicting things. And, the invitation from Neptune is towards your spiritual awareness, your intuitive nature, your sensitivity. Why am I here? The meaning of your existence. I mean, I've often mentioned that I live in kind of existential crisis, um, and that kind of, why am I here? That kind of thing is attributed to, I've got a very strong Neptune in my chart. Um, and then that moves into kind of your dreams. So, are your dreams disturbed? Is your sleep disturbed? Um, and that kind of that kind of dreamlike quality that sometimes we have, where we get a bit foggy and misty, um, and we can't quite see through. Um, that's a Neptune invitation from the Neptune square.
That's so interesting. I mean, brain fog being a big menopause symptom, I'm wondering how we can embrace that more. I mean, I love the idea of it being more involved in dreams. I love to be in the dream world. I think there'll be something in my chart around that. So I love exploring dreams, subconscious, being away with the fairies, as I've often been told is what I am. But yeah, it can also be a bit inconvenient when you can't find your words and perhaps can't
Yeah,
concentrate. So yeah, perhaps is there an invitation there just to lean in, or at least just to understand or take care, perhaps?
yeah, absolutely. And so let's do again something that people
Mm.
might be able to understand. Is if they were born between 1970 and 1984. So I'm not entirely sure about your chart. I should just get your chart up, shouldn't I? Whilst next time you're chatting, I will. I'll get your chart up so I can see it. Um, but so those people had Neptune in Sagittarius when they were born. So Sagittarius is going to invite them to question their spirituality, to think about expanding their spirituality, um, like looking a little bit. So Sagittarius is very far seeing, and talks about your beliefs and um, your education. Maybe you might want to, you might go into a new career because you re-educate yourself, because what you wanted to do when you were 18 is not the same as what you want to do in your 40s. And that invitation. So I think I am of that generation, just about, um, Neptune in Sagittarius. And, I think we're probably one of the first in our generation, if you look up across past generations, of having two careers. Before it was you left school, you did your job, you stayed in your job until you retired. And that's not how it is now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
That's got
that's part of the menopause change, is because Neptune hasn't been here in this place for 140 years. Well, from when we were born. So it's like, okay, so this is a new wave. It's a new wave of looking. I haven't done the history. You can look back across history. I recently did it for Pluto, but I haven't for Neptune. But you can look back over history and go back 140 something years and see what was going on in history 100 and something years, and you'll normally see a parallel in terms of how we're all behaving. So if you kind of know that what you're doing, I mean, when I first, I was the first person in my family to go self-employed, and it caused like an uproar, um, a very subtle uproar, because we're not very emotional, but very subtle uproar. Um, but like, what are you doing? You've got a great finance career. You, you know, you're paid well for doing what you're doing. You've got to the heights of, why are you throwing it away? But that
mm,
drive inside, right? To do something different, to explore something new, to have that second career, to to really think, is this what I wanted out of life? That's a menopause invite from this Neptune square, which again, I just love that women are getting women are getting this opportunity. It it lots of the things that we talk about with menopause are all the negative things like the hot flashes and the, can't sleep and the, brain fog and all of these things. But how about tuning into those, the potential, the invite, the opportunity of it? Um, which is why I've enjoyed geeking out on it because it's
Yeah.
a whole different way of looking at it.
Absolutely. That's amazing. And I think I definitely relate. I mean, I had a similar NHS career in terms of a stable career. It was good. I even enjoyed it, but there was that pull to do something more, to change direction, to
Yeah.
bring together bits of learning and to explore my own direction, which wouldn't have fitted within the constraints of the NHS budget for the training, even if it could be beneficial. It's too far on the left field for what they could see.
Mm.
So yeah, absolutely, can definitely relate. And I got a very similar response from many people. It was a mix actually. We had the "What are you doing?" and we had that twinkle in the eye of I could see they wanted to do it too. So
Yeah.
it was a split decision. But I do think having that perimenopause invitation, that pause with all of that going on, it's an opportunity to reevaluate, are we doing what we really want to do? As you said, we sometimes start our career, even if we're not aware of it, off the back of other people's expectations or our own expectations of what we thought things would be like. And I guess life experience tells us how that goes, and we get to pick again almost, I think, at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the olden days, we would go through like well, not all of us would get to kind of this age, but we would go through like the wise woman or wise man kind of transition where, you became an elder.
Mm.
And yeah, that kind of that invitation, we we don't value that anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's changing. I think it's going to have to. I mean, our governments are making retirement age kind of go up and up and up and up, where employers are kind of, still don't want to employ at those more mature ages. So some things have got to change, and I think they will. Um, that's what these societal planets do. They push things forward. But for now, I think for women particularly, we've been invited to have a second flush, if you like. That's not a hot flash. It's actually you've got a second chance to do something different, and I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, I think starting from that experience, isn't it, and bringing that forward. And I heard something this other day. I think we're on one of only three species, I'm probably getting that number wrong, that has a menopause and that has survivorship past reproductive years. And it is and it is the big
Ah,
brained mammals. So it's us, whales, and elephants. There may be more, because we have that knowledge to pass down after the reproductive years.
yeah,
Basically, we get a chance to be grandmas. And
yeah,
it's our role to educate, is what they were saying. I thought that was super good and thought, yeah, of course, because there's so much knowledge we amass, and why wouldn't we pass that on?
yeah.
So yeah, that makes so much sense. So are there any other planets that are particularly poignant, or are they I mean, I know there's more, but like,
There is more. Always there's more,
but
Carly. Um,
any other big hitters?
so well, there are three more that we could speak about, which I will briefly run through, and then you can ask me to. We'll see how we're doing for time, basically.
Yeah.
Um, but Uranus is the next planet in. So we've gone Pluto, Neptune, now we're on Uranus. And
Mhm.
Uranus is the the first planet that we can't see with our naked eye. So until we developed and devised telescopes,
Mm.
we couldn't see Uranus. So Uranus has the energy, if you like, um, of being the observer, so outside of what we know. So it's quite often surprising. It's revolutionary. That's the energy, and freedom. So revolutionary, freedom, quite radical in its approach. So again, so Uranus is like the life cycle. I love Uranus and the way Uranus works. Uranus is like the full life cycle of humanity as we are now. So you will have heard the saying, give me a child until he's 7, and
Mm.
I will show you it's actually the man, but we'll put that one to one side. Um, and that that kind of 7-year cycle, lots and lots of
Mm.
psychological things, physical things, etc., etc. But our life continues on then in roughly 7-year cycles. So Uranus takes 84 years to go around the sun, and 12 times 7. So each of the 12 zodiac signs times 7 is 84. So beautifully maps our it beautifully maps kind of our cycle of life. And it's again one of those things, when I found it, I was completely captivated and thought it was amazing, and then did quite a bit of work with that for myself. So if you remember what I said about the circle, we cut it in half and we cut it in quarters. Well, at 42, half of 84, Uranus is in what's called an opposition. So um, you'll see that we've had quite a few, right? 36 to 45, kind of early 40s, and 40 to 42 now with Uranus. These are all happening simultaneously, or certainly one after the other. If they don't happen at the same time, they happen over a few years simultaneously. And they're all the things that are contributing to this perimenopause stroke menopause, depending on our own body. So again, it's an opposition. So we've been invited to evaluate, we've been invited to cultivate, and we're evaluating and cultivating freedom, kind of thinking outside of the norm, breaking free from what has always been the case. And again, depending where Uranus was when you were born. So for me, it was in Libra. I now have your chart here, so I can tell you that for you, it's in Sagittarius. So for me in Libra, and for anybody born within kind of who's listening between 68 and 75-ish, there's probably throughout your early menopause time, you're probably going to be invited to look radically at restructuring your relationships, or breaking free from traditional relationship patterns, or um, doing relationships differently. So perhaps looking at different forms of intimacy or different forms of connection. And for you, Uranus in Sagittarius, um, you're probably going to be looking, and I can so see you in this, you're probably going to be looking at seeking meaning beyond the physical. So you've done your PT training, you've done your nutrition, you're now kind of you're looking at beyond that and exploring further than that. So you're going to be kind of getting a bit more philosophical or spiritual, um, and maybe looking into educational pursuits or traveling. Now, whilst I know you're not necessarily traveling, your work has moved from kind of caring for people in the NHS to educating people and coaching people through becoming better educated. And that's your invitation from your Uranus square.
There we go. Just when we think making it all up as we go along, there's a bit more guidance there than we realise. Yeah.
And that's why I love astrology, because it happens
Mm.
whether we engage with it or not.
Yeah. That's a good metaphor for life anyway, isn't it? It's going on whether we engage with it or not. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
I've enjoyed engaging with it a lot more. So yeah.
And
Um,
the same for me, really. The more I know, the more I come to understand, the 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 easier it is to know what's going on, and to be able to remember I'm Pluto in Virgo, to be able to cut myself a break, because it's like, well, that's what's going on. Just let it be for a little while. It's going to be fine. Or this is your invitation. Oh my goodness, that sounds exciting. Let's see what we can do with that.
Yeah. I think it gives you that focus, doesn't it? When you think, actually, this is supporting me, so let's make use of it. Or, okay, we need to just weather this. So, yeah,
Yeah,
bring out the kindness where we can. So I love that. Yeah. Did you say there were two more planets that were
there are.
particularly poignant?
There are.
Can you squeeze them in?
So I can squeeze them in. I'm fine. I've got time. It's whether people are still interested. So when you hit around about 50, so 49 to 51, you
Mm,
have what's called your Chiron return. So Chiron, which I didn't explain and talk about when I was talking about all of these planets, but Chiron sits between in a belt that is between Saturn and Uranus. It has a very squiffly um, trajectory. So there's lots of things we could talk about with Chiron. But one that you may be familiar with is the myth of Chiron, um, who was a wounded centaur in Greek mythology. And even though they were a wounded centaur, they still healed or worked with other other people to bring about healing. So Chiron's often called the wounded healer. And it's wherever Chiron is in your chart, it's probably where our strongest trigger is. We talk about triggers these days, don't we? Or like little pulses of things that get us going. Um, but that pulse point is also our biggest invitation to make an impact and to make a difference.
mm,
So I know one of my a previous mentor used to say your message is in the mess,
mm,
and that's a little bit that's they were basically talking about Chiron as a wounded
mm,
healer in that. So Chiron's rotation is about 49 to 50, 51 years. So let's say 50. So it's like the perfect midlife crisis planet, right? So all of those other ones we've spoken about, they were like the life begins at 40 kind of planet. And now we've got like the crazy midlife crisis planet.
mm,
Um, but what that allows us to do, so it allows us to turn the thing that perhaps caused us pain into something that we can use to help and to be of service. So that happens at around about 50, which depending where you are in your menopausal cycle at that point, you could be kind of properly into menopause at that point. You might be nearing the end of it, depending how early you started, or you might be just be at that transition movement point from perimenopause to menopause. But basically, it's the transition planet.
mm,
Um, so Chiron for me, let me just see where it is for you. Chiron for me was in Aries when I was born, and for you is in Taurus. So I purposefully went to Taurus with this. So people with Chiron in Aries, they were born between 69 and 77. So that's the people that I'm speaking to here. And a lot of what they're going through is probably to do with personal identity.
mm,
So again, in menopause, that's a big theme, isn't it? That personal identity and knowing who you are. And we've spoken about it already, kind of maybe our role in life is changing. So perhaps we go from a career person to a caregiver, or, perhaps we've got elderly parents or whatever that we need to take care of,
mm,
or maybe we go from just a partner to a mother, and then, your kids go to school, or you've got the empty nest syndrome, all of these things that are intertwined with
mm,
menopause. Well, for those of us 69 to 77, that personal identity, like who am I? Um, how am I going to show up in the, I like, okay, so I've done 50 years now. I've possibly got another 50. What am I going to do with them? Can I continue like this forever? Um, and they probably have a pioneering spirit. So Aries is very pioneering, very action driven. We've spoken about this, right? But our bodies perhaps aren't up to that anymore. So
Mm.
how do you balance like what you're physically capable of with what internally you feel like you should be capable of or you used to be capable of? Um, and there's a lot, the invitation for kind of Chiron in Aries people is to find ways to lead and inspire either themselves or others at the same time as kind of embracing their vulnerability and
Mm.
realizing that they're not who they were, basically. But I mean, we never are. We're always evolving. But it becomes a bit more stark with some of the life things that happen when we
Mm.
kind of hit our 50s, the end of our 40s and our 50s.
That makes so much sense, especially as around that time of life, sort of after 50, 51, we might start to be in that post-menopause era. So perhaps a lot of the hormonal fluctuations may have started to calm down. So,
Yeah,
and perhaps if HRT has been used, it might be established, or it might be, they might have got on top of a few things, or it might be
yeah,
feeling calmer. So yeah, you're in a much better position to be passing on the knowledge or doing that work by the sounds of it. So that's so interesting.
yeah. And for
Yeah.
you, so you're
Yeah.
77 to 84, you had Chiron in Taurus. So you might feel you might feel the need to kind of reconnect with your body a little bit more.
Mm.
So I know your body's been present with you for some time in the work that you do, etc. But for some of your clients and the listeners, they might have really disregarded their body, but the invite is to come back and really give their body some attention, which I know we've spoken about before, and how kind of osteoporosis um, can be supported if we start to engage with our body again, for example. Um, we might also be looking in this Chiron return, we might also be looking at our self-worth and
Mm.
our material worth, and how stable we feel. And if we don't feel stable, we might be encouraged to kind of bring some stability to our finances and our where we physically choose to place ourselves. And there's an interconnect at this point between our physical and um, our emotional bodies. So, I mean, certainly for me, well, for me at about that age, I had a quite extreme bout of depression that completely floored me. Um, it was it was finally the thing that got me to admit that I was, yeah, okay, this is a dark night of the soul. It was a proper breakdown. I know I'm the other people, but certainly at this point, um, yeah, that was my invite. It was to start engaging with my body and with my emotions because I had pretty much done almost everything I could not to.
Yeah.
And again, the invitation from this is to kind of become a guide to others navigating how they work with their body and body acceptance and kind of that more material well-being.
Yeah.
So I loved that for you, that you're kind of already living. You've not got to that age yet. You haven't been through your Chiron return, but you're already living the invitation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, the body was a battle through most of my life, so perhaps it's been a bit more present, and hence why it's been worked on a little sooner. But I have noticed at times, especially with the moon and things like that, sometimes I go through things just a little ahead of my clients, and seem to have just worked through when it becomes time for me to then guide it. So perhaps this it's just meant to be that way around so that I can be the guide there.
Yeah,
And
perfectly
learning
timed.
that, yeah, and then learning that does help you sort of embrace the challenge a little bit more, doesn't it? So,
Yeah.
yeah, amazing. I have lost track of where we're up to with planets. Have we?
So
Is there
we
another
have
big one?
We have one more,
Yeah.
and I don't have as much information about this one because the one that, so like the end of our menopause journey, if you like. So we've done those little the big planets with perimenopause. We've looked at Chiron with menopause, and there's a bit of a a handover there. You know, some people might go through it quicker than others. But our last planet to look at is Saturn, and Saturn is um, the last planet that we can see with our naked eye, and it's the planet that gives us structure.
Mm.
And it's the planet of it's a planet that rules all sorts of cool things. I like Saturn. Other people find his structure constricting, but I really like Saturn, so I'm very happy to chat about Saturn. But Saturn gives us the container that we operate in. And Saturn takes 30 years, well, 29 and a half, 29 whatever, to move around, to move around. So we have what's called a Saturn return when we're 30, and then again when we're 60. Now, those are very round numbers. It can be, depending where Saturn was when you were born, it can be a bit quicker or a bit slower. Um, but around about the 30 and the 60 mark. So if you think about life, certainly as it's developed these days, you know, like at 30, if you've done childhood, you've done your teenage years, you've done your education or your apprenticeship, and you're in full-time work, you've probably had a few little plays with relationships, and you may be thinking about settling down, and perhaps you're even thinking about starting a family. And that's like the first 30 years in a nutshell. You can certainly no longer call yourself a child, right?
Mm.
You can't get away with that. It's like, yeah, no, come on, you've got to. And some of us, you know, I had my daughter when I was 20, so I'd done that. I did that a lot earlier. And in my 30s, I had different moments of, oh, this is new. And, you know, settling down in a different way. But that's our invite. Our first invite is to go from leaving aside all of our childhood things and even the little things that we're trying to drag with us, and we're getting to be a little bit more adult now. And then fast forward another 30 years, so it's going to go around again. Saturn's still moving, so he's gone around again. He's a he for me. Forgive me if the genders don't work for you. But we've been around again. Saturn's come around again, and we've got to 60, and you know, our invitation has changed again. We're no longer bringing up children. We're no longer productive from um, a physical creating children perspective. That fertility has dropped away, and our invitation is to move from parenthood to elderhood. So that at around about 60, 58, 59, 61 is our invitation to officially step up and to move into elderhood. So, you know, we've been through all of those transitions I've just spoken about with all those little invitations to transform and to do things differently. And where now we've got increased self-knowledge, we've probably released some of those societal expectations and that kind of thing. We've embraced our personal power. We've, you know, maybe got deeper intuition from the Neptune square, and we've basically got more inner strength. And at this point, we step into our elderhood. And in theory, by about that time, we should be finished with the menopause. We should have found a new balance of how our hormones are going to be in our bodies. And we've started to kind of the embrace the body that we now have and the ongoing life that we can have.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, there's so much to look forward to when we say it like that, isn't it? And I think we're not brought up to think that way, but it does certainly reinforce what I want to do for people is to just help them have strong bodies so that by the time they get to this age, with all these wonderful things ahead, that the body can support as much as possible, for
Yeah.
all the excitement and all the wisdom that gets to be brought through. So yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm a very age positive person anyway, but I think this paints an even more exciting picture for collecting more birthday candles, is what I like to say. So I
Yeah.
mean, you have covered an incredible amount, and I think people need a notepad and pen for this episode. What would you say would be any top tips for the listeners that are curious about astrology and how to apply it to themselves?
Top tips. So it is a little bit like a rabbit hole. So, um, I would say unless you actually want to get into it and learn it, like I have, and if you have, I can give you two really good schools that I used to kind of explore my own astrology. Um, but if you're not actually that interested, but you would like pointers, then definitely get in touch with an astrologer and um, have some have some consultations. It works really well in it works really well as a therapeutic tool, which is how I use it. If you get to know yourself better, then you can understand yourself better and then understand life better. So, of course, there are lots of free resources on the internet. Um, they just take time for you to kind of sift through. I'll leave you with a couple of websites that your readers might find useful. Um, and I'm sure you'll be putting my details in there. And I would love to chat to people. I probably wouldn't book just one session. I would think about booking it, depending on how interested you are. I would think about booking a series and, really spending some time and just getting to know yourself and to understand where you are at. Um, I have all of these notes. It would be lovely, wouldn't it, if I could pull them together in a in some kind of content that I can pass on to your listeners. So if people are
Amazing.
interested in that, let me know and I'll pull it together if people are interested.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And the links you've mentioned, I can put those in the show notes. So just share those with me afterwards, and I'll make sure they're accessible to everybody.
Perfect.
So, what else have you got coming up in your world, and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So it uh, it depends when obviously I work with the cycles and rhythms of nature. So I am not I don't have a schedule that people would necessarily understand. He I work with the cycles of each of the planets. So, um, for example, today as we're recording this, Mercury is just going retrograde, and I work with Mercury as a project manager. So last Mercury cycle, I launched a magazine. So you could find me in the breathwork in the a breathwork magazine. If you happen to also be a breath facilitator, you could write for the magazine. I would love to help you find your voice and speak. So I was super happy to receive an article from you, Carly. So you'll find Carly in there too.
Yeah.
So of course, yes, you can. I'm telling you this because every 4 months I host a session where I talk about the upcoming Mercury cycle and how you might engage with that in your work. Um, I have I teach breath work, and I do that with the elements of nature. So each of the astrological signs have an element and an energy invite, and I I host regular sessions in York, the beautiful city of York, where we explore those elements. And at the same time, I teach breath work in those sessions. So if you wanted to learn how to become a breath worker and engage with the first ever cycle and the last ever cycle of life, then you can do that. And of course, there's my website and if you happen to be a wellness practitioner, for example, I also bring the finance and the business aspect of things and do cosmic business coaching, as I call it. So we work very definitely with the cycles and rhythms and the astrology. It all mushes up effectively. So yeah, pop over to the website and actually just DM me. and let me know what you're looking for. And I will either point you in the right direction, or I will tell you, because I'm very clear about this, or I will tell you that I'm not the person for you and then point you somewhere where I think you might be able to be helped.
Amazing. Of course, you are involved in lots of things, as you stated at the beginning, so there's no other proof, but I can certainly vouch for the breathwork training, which I'm still currently enjoying with you. So thank you for that, Sharyn. And
You're
thank you
welcome.
so much for your time today and your overwhelming amount of knowledge, which is now captured within the podcast that we can re-listen to as many times as we wish, and of course get in contact with you for some deeper insights. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I'm just noticed the time. I see that we've gone over our time, so it's going to be one of the longer episodes on your podcast. If so, well done, anybody that's actually got to the end and is still listening to us.
At least they know which planet they can blame for whatever is going on.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much, Sharyn, and I'm sure there'll be a reason to have you back on again in future.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.